Hello and good afternoon. Welcome everybody to this week's Friday Author Talks. I am here with Shelli Frew, who is the author of Time Sailors. And before we jump into all of the good things with her today and let her introduce herself, I just want to say, first, let's please give her a welcome, and then also hit the like and subscribe button if you will. First thing, we'll just get it out of the way here at the beginning of the show. And if you're joining us for the first time, you've never been on the show, just really quick, we'll introduce her and she will be doing a live reading for us. And we love to take questions and thoughts, comments, whatever you'd like to talk with her, because after her reading she will be doing some Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions into the comment section. I will be taking those down as she's reading, and then at the very end of the show we will be doing a live drawing for a giveaway of an ebook of her book. So good little lineup today, and I'm looking forward to it. So Shelli, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and your book, your work and
Hi,
such. Yes.
I'm Shelli Frew. I'm an author. My first published book is Time Sailors. It's a time travel science fiction book. I'm also a playwright. I do immersive theater and a circus performer. I'm from the East Coast originally, Virginia, but I live in California now. I'm in San Francisco.
So how's it going? How is it down there? I heard that California never even came out of any kind of quarantine at all. So you've been all cooped up.
Yeah, we kind of like started to come out of quarantine, and now we've got some restaurants that have like they're blocking off the street so people can sit outside. But for the most part, you're not really supposed to go into stores and things. Everyone's got their face covered, obviously.
Oh dear.
Um, Although people were doing that before the lockdown was like really in a full effect anyway, because it's not so weird to cover your face here. We have a fire season. We have a large Asian population who wears them when they're sick, so it
Well,
doesn't seem as odd to us.
so has this affected your book selling? I know that we've had other authors who do a convention circuit, and do you do a convention circuit, and is this impacting that out of curiosity? And if so, I don't know what your home convention or event is, but you should give them a shout out.
Yeah, so I was supposed to go to Clockwork Alchemy.
Okay.
I don't know if some of your viewers might know it. It's a fun steampunk one. Actually, one of the founders, this really nice guy, just passed away from COVID.
Oh, oh, that's
Mhm.
terrible.
Yeah. So that one didn't happen. That was actually one of the first weekends that stuff was canceled. So they almost made it, but then they didn't. And I was supposed to do the Bay Area Book Fest, which is just a big conference just for authors.
Hmm.
And obviously that got canceled. Yeah, and all the shows
Like
canceled.
everything, 2020
Everything.
canceled.
It was the year that wasn't.
The year that wasn't. That's kind of true. I'm excited though, because it seems like I'm excited for to hear your reading and then afterwards, because it seems like you've got some cool things to talk about and ways that you've adapted to this that I think will be quite interesting. But for the time being, would you tell us a little bit about the book that you have there, Time Sailors, and what is its genre? What is it about a little bit? And then I will turn the camera over to you for our afternoon reading.
So it's a time travel science fiction. Um, it's about three friends who travel through time. They can just do it as kind of part of their self. There's just people in this alternate reality that can time travel. And I wanted it to be a little bit more fun. Like some time travel stories are a little too self-serious for me.
That's true. They can
So
get very heavy.
yeah, so like there's danger and like I definitely talk about like actual historical things that would have impacted different types of people, but also they use the ability to go back to 1969 and watch the moon landing live because that seemed fun to them.
I
Um,
think if I could go back to 1969, I would go to Woodstock. Wasn't that in 1969?
yeah, I imagine the characters in this book would probably go to Woodstock a couple of times. That's the fun of
It's,
time travel, right?
it's so fun. You
You
just
get to do
keep
it
doing
again.
Woodstock.
Yeah.
Seeing
That
the
was
moon
amazing.
landing, though, would also be quite cool. So talk about
Yeah.
momentous moments in history. So, yes. So anyway, I didn't mean to hijack that right there. So because you were on a roll, and I was like, Woodstock. So, um,
No, I
okay.
can say canon, absolutely. Some of the characters have definitely been to Woodstock. That makes sense.
I love that. Okay, so I guess that I will go ahead and turn the camera over to you and let you. Are you going to be reading the first chapter, or what kind of an excerpt can we expect here?
I'll read the first chapter and some of the second chapter.
Okay. Well, I
The
will go
first
ahead
chapter.
and turn this over to you. And of course, just one more time, if you guys are tuning in from home, feel free to put any questions that you may have into the comments, and I will take those down and we will spring them upon her when she is done reading. So, okay, here you go.
Chapter 1: The Last Fight. Virginia strolled around the Mission District of San Francisco on a gritty, hot summer day in 1964. She ambled, peering into shop windows and listening to the Spanish chatter that filled the streets. She planned on walking to the local diner for a blackberry milkshake, but felt no hurry. The hot sun warmed the skin on her shoulders, a glorious feeling that was unthinkable in her old life. The other time seemed so long ago, it was almost like a dream to her now. People rushed by her, and she watched as they stopped to chat with neighbors, flirt, and yell. The local plaza spilled over with people and life. Young men crowded the square, hollering at the hurried women walking past, and several elderly gentlemen played chess with quiet contemplation. A church group milled about, listening to a priest preach about damnation and salvation. Virginia loved this time. The old neighborhood had been taken over entirely by immigrants from South America during the previous 20 years, a blink of an eye to a traveler, pushing the German citizens to other parts of the city. She felt so free here, now. No longer obligated by the rules of her time, she could wear pants without consequence. She could leave her long brown hair down or part it on the side like a man or even chop it off. No one cared a bit. The smell of hot dogs and french fries filled the eatery. Virginia ordered her milkshake and sat by the window, people watching both those outside the diner and in. Teens filtered in, happily laughing, roughhousing with friends. An elderly couple sat at a booth, holding hands and speaking quietly. Virginia took another sip of her shake and noticed a tall, slender man watching her from across the street. He looked like a parody of a 1920s mobster, slicked back hair and pinstriped suit included. He even chewed on a toothpick, lazily rolling it around in his mouth, though Virginia could barely see it from her seat. She paid and left the diner, intent on spending the rest of the afternoon in the park. Upon her arrival, she immediately noticed a crowd of people covering the green meadows, mothers pushing giggling children on the swings, couples canoodling on picnic blankets. After a few hours of napping on the grass, Virginia spied the man in the suit again, this time leaning against the statue of Hidalgo. He looked over the green, his back to her, periodically taking a drag from a cigarette. The sun dipped down in the sky, bringing an evening chill that was so familiar to the city. Virginia started the trek back to her house in Twin Peaks, which was perched high on the side of the mountain. The area felt improbable to her, as houses were precariously situated on cliffs, and roads were so steep the cars strained to climb them. Whoever had originally decided to build here had to have been mad. Virginia loved it. Her charming little greenhouse, gifted to her in a letter from an older self, sat on a winding road, nestled between taller homes. To me, up on Corbett Street. The green one with the rosemary out front. Don't forget to leave food out for the cat. He's mostly around in the 20s, 50s, and 70s, although I've seen him once or twice in 89. Bought the place in 1918. Have it till 2065. From you. The four-story home reminded her of an upside-down funhouse. Instead of reaching up in the air, level stacked one on top of the other, it stretched down the side of the cliff. The front door opened into the top floor, along with a kitchen and a cozy living dining room. The first set of stairs would bring her to a small office and a library. Down the next flight, the bedrooms, and at the very bottom was a small windowless basement where someone had written "The Dungeon" in messy, spiky handwriting on the door. It made Virginia smile every time she saw it. She hoped to meet whoever wrote it soon. She had reached the outdoor staircase that cut between two buildings, a shortcut up the mountain, when she heard a twig snap behind her. She spun around and peered into the twilight. She saw nothing but an empty street and turned to continue on her way. A loud pop rang out in the dark. Suddenly, the man from before stepped out from the shadows on the step just above her. He wore a cold, dead look in his eyes. Virginia didn't have time to speak before the man, in one smooth, practiced motion, pulled something sharp and silver from his pocket and jammed it into her chest just below her collarbone. His other hand shot out and shoved her roughly down the stairs. She fleetingly saw the stars as she tumbled backwards to the street below. Virginia landed on the pavement, her head thumping against the hard surface. The piece of metal in her chest sent a wave of pain searing through her. The man calmly walked down the stairs towards her. She shut her eyes and willed herself elsewhere, focusing on her safe, warm house just up the hill. A jolt ran through her and she gasped. She didn't move. She tried once more, and again the jolt shocked her, keeping her in the here and now. The man stepped down the last few steps, his cold eyes looking not at her, but through her. Virginia stumbled to her feet and ran back towards the populated main streets, hoping to find people. She clutched wildly at the metal the man had impaled her with, which had only made its way deeper after the fall. Virginia, steeling herself, grabbed it and yanked it out in a quick motion. She cried out in pain and dropped it to the ground as she hurried forward, already feeling warm blood bubbling up. She ran awkwardly, cradling her wound and fighting the pain that radiated from every step. Another popping noise, and the man stood in front of her, blocking her path. She stopped short, dumbstruck. He laughed, a short, angry noise in the back of his throat. He was like her. In the roughly 3.5 years of her travels through time, she'd never met anyone else like her. Her older self never indicated people like her existed. In confusion, she stammered, "You're the same as me." He stopped, squinted his eyes, and stared at her. "You're not her. Not yet." He took a step towards her. Virginia felt warm blood dribbling down the side of her face and realized the fall from the stairs must have done more damage than she thought. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest as the world swirled around her, making her feel like a spinning top. "Please." He shook his head. "No." He took another step. Virginia turned and ran blindly, the dizzy feeling in her head making her trip and stumble. The man's footsteps, unhurried and calm, echoed behind her. She staggered to the nearest house, a large manor surrounded by a high stone wall and a solid iron gate. Feeling her blood drench her shirt, Virginia yanked on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. She frantically rang the bell and yelled for help. The man laughed, enjoying her fear. He could easily catch her. This was just a game to him. She sprinted away, screaming for help. No lights clicked on, no doors opened, no one came to answer her call. She turned a corner and raced down a side street. Another pop sounded, and he stood in front of her. Virginia tumbled to the ground, skinning her palms. "Pointless to run, girl. No getting away from me." He pulled out a knife, raked the blade over her shoulder, and watched the blood well up, trickling down her arms. She crawled forward, desperate for an escape. Virginia willed herself upright and spotted a fire escape on the next building over. She hobbled forward as quickly as her body could allow. The deep gash on her chest sent a continuous wave of pain through her body, and the new cut on her shoulder throbbed terribly. Virginia somehow made it to the ladder and forced herself upwards. Her wounds screamed in protest, but she grit her teeth and climbed, knowing her pursuer wasn't far behind. The man appeared below her almost immediately and hauled himself up. She was reaching for the top rung of the ladder when she felt the man grip her left arm and yank her sharply back. In shock, Virginia broke her grip and they both slipped off the metal rings of the ladder and toppled towards the hard ground. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as they fell backwards. Virginia curled her right arm towards her chest and tucked her head in anticipation of the fall. The man maintained his grip on her left wrist as they fell, wrenching her arm. In her injured mind, she pictured an old manor house, far from her current city. A large, sprawling, ivy-covered home in the small mountain town where she used to live. Her sense of time muddled. She landed 50 years past when she stepped foot there previously, and 10 years since anyone lived in the home. She meant to arrive on the ground floor in the parlor, but instead ended up in an upstairs bedroom. She dragged the man with her through time, something she definitely did not intend to do. Virginia had never traveled with passengers before. It was a jarring sensation that stunned her for a few seconds and drained her remaining energy, and everything went black. Virginia came to lying on a dusty hardwood floor, her left arm jutting at an odd angle away from her body. It took a moment for her brain to process what she was looking at. Her left arm had sunk into the floor just below the elbow, and in front of her the man gasped as blood spurted from his mouth. His torso had been level with her arm when they appeared. The floor ran through him just below where his ribs started. One arm had sunk under the floorboards, the free arm frantically clawing at the wood as he tried pulling himself free. She screamed and tugged at her trapped arm in vain as the man continued to struggle. The man's flailing grew weaker and slower until he gradually stopped raking at the floorboards. He slumped over, blood dribbling out of his mouth. Dead. Virginia skipped a few seconds through time and a few feet over. She peered down at her previously trapped arm. It wasn't there. Her arm ended just below the elbow, right where the floor had severed it. In confusion, she grabbed the stump with her remaining hand, blood slurting through her fingers. She tried standing, fell, and tried again. The whole world wavered, and her legs refused to work. A thump of shoes echoed from downstairs, voices shouting, then screaming. She heard several people running up the stairs before she blacked out again. Chapter 2. Old New Friends. It was hot. The small house had no air conditioning. None of the houses on this block did. It was stifling everywhere. Heat draped around the town, suffocating, slowing time to a crawl. Stokely rolled over, kicked the sheet off himself, and sighed. 7 a.m, and already he was covered in sweat. He rose, dressing quickly in a collared blue cotton shirt and the thinnest pants he owned. The clothes hung loose on his slim frame, an inch too short. At 19, he stood among the tallest in his small town. Chansey and Orsby, his roommates, sat slumped at the kitchen table, fanning themselves with newspapers and eating cereal. They were having an animated discussion about the day's events. Yeah, getting shot's a possibility, but they know that and they still want to help. Why not let them? Chansey proclaimed. Orsby made a face. There are worse ways to die than getting shot. What are you two arguing about? Said Stokely, grabbing himself a bowl and sitting down. Dr. Bell and the nurses at his practice offered free emergency medical care for anyone injured. He set up shop at St. Christopher's since it's closer to where the rally is going to be than his building. He said he wanted to be close by in case anything... Chansey paused, searching for the right word. In case anything happens. What if the church gets bombed while Dr. Bell is there? Orsby asked. I don't see why he has to be at the church. If he gets himself killed, we'll have to go an hour away to see a doctor. He had a point. Dr. Spatcher, the only other doctor in town, did not treat the local black population. Recently, he'd begun refusing to treat whites known to sympathize with the movement. Well, there's nothing to be done of it now. People will do what they want to do, Stokely said. The three friends finished their breakfast in silence. After eating, they reluctantly headed out into the oppressive heat. Cops milled around the main streets in anticipation of the protest scheduled for that day. Upon arriving at the church, the three waved to Pastor Freeman, head of St. Christopher's. It was common knowledge that this was the main church in town for the black community. The three also greeted Mr. Hadwin and saw that other whites were gathering around the church to march in solidarity. The friends knew Mr. Hadwin was the only one of any standing. He was the owner of the only grocery store in town and a furniture factory that employed both Stokely and Orsby. He also terrified most of the children in town. Pastor Friedman and Mr. Hadwin had fought alongside each other in World War II, and Mr. Hadwin bore the scars to prove it. Stokely had always been curious about the war, but had never been brave enough to ask the men. It wasn't something veterans talked about. Loads of people scurried around the back of the church. Protesters put the finishing touches on signs and shouted instructions through megaphones. Several lawyers and students from up north took down names in case of arrest. Chansey spotted his older sister, Ruth, in the crowd and led his friends over to her. Hello, you three. Looking for a job to do? They nodded. Chansey, Mr. Overby needs help at the registration booth. Orsby, Stokely, you two hammer the signs together. They're in a pile around back. Thanks. She sounded rushed and worried, although she looked perfectly put together as always, dressed smooth and wrinkle-free, perfect black hair tied down with a silk scarf. Ruth hurried off, leaving the scent of her rose perfume lingering in the air. Orsby and Stokely waved goodbye to their friend and made their way to the large pile of wooden signs. 2 of the student protesters were already there, busily hammering signs to wooden posts. I am David. This is Stan. I'm Orsby. He's Stokely. Nice to meet you. They went about their work, the sweltering heat bearing down on them. David and Stan chatted the entire time they worked, discussing their college up in Chicago. Stokely and Orsby occasionally asked them questions about campus life, but it sounded like a world that was very far from their own. After some time, Stokely noticed a young white woman watching them. She sat under a tree at the edge of the church's land. Behind her, the woods stretched for miles and tempted Stokely with its cool shade. To say the young woman looked out of place was an understatement. All the women at the protest wore dresses and makeup with well-kept hair, while the mysterious girl sported damp clothes, torn jean shorts, and a button-up green men's shirt with rolled-up sleeves. Half a dozen wristwatches of various size and color adorned her left arm. Her long, light brown hair hung damp around her face, and she was barefoot. Next to her on the ground was a backpack and an umbrella, despite the cloud-free sky. She looked familiar to Stokely, but he couldn't remember from where or when. The young woman smiled at Stokely and waved to him. Stokely awkwardly raised his hand, sure now that he had met her before and could not remember the encounter. The other three boys turned to look at who Stokely was waving to. "Who's that?" said Stan. "I don't know, but she looks familiar. Do you recognize her?" Orsby shook his head. "I doubt she's with any of the student groups," David said. "We were told to look respectable the whole time we were here." Stokely could tell from the way he said it that David thought the girl was of an unrespectable sort. "What if a reporter snaps a picture of her? The news will say we're encouraging vagrants." Stan nodded in agreement, and Orsby shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe she isn't here for the protest. There's a river about 2 miles into the woods. She might have been going for a swim and stopped to see what the commotion was." Stan stared at him. "But she has shorts on and no shoes. I'm pretty sure that's a man's shirt. Women shouldn't dress like that. It's asking for trouble." Stokely stood up. "Well, I'm going to go talk to her. Say hello." But as he turned, the young woman disappeared. He scanned the crowds for her, but at that moment, Pastor Friedman called everyone away from their assorted tasks. He stood on a chair, waving away an offered bullhorn. Years of preaching to the Sunday masses made such tools unnecessary, and his deep voice greeted the crowd. "This is looking to be a long, hot, tiring day for everyone, but Lord willing, it will help to further our cause. I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who came out today, whether you are from St. Christopher's congregation or have traveled a great distance to get here. All of this today would not be possible if not for every one of you. Please be careful, and I cannot stress this enough. Keep the protest nonviolent." He paused, and the crowd shifted with anticipation. "We are out to better the world, and to do that we must be better than the oppressors we fight. Thank you." The large crowd applauded and began to move on toward the street. Stokely spotted the young woman from before. She'd somehow managed to change into a simple blue sundress during the pastor's short speech. Her hair looked dry and neatly brushed. Stokely wondered how she'd done that. He moved through the crowd toward her, noticing that she still tread on bare feet, but the umbrella and backpack were gone. The wristwatches remained and twinkled in the sunlight. Coming up beside her, Stokely realized he didn't really know what to say. Hi. Sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. Had to finish the signs and all." She stared at him blankly for a second before her face broke out in a wide smile. "That's okay. Everyone's busy, right? My name's Virginia Bell." She held out her hand, which Stokely shook. "I'm Miles. Everyone calls me by my last name, Stokely." "Have we met before? You look kind of familiar." Virginia shrugged and gave him a smile. "Who knows? Perhaps we met in a dream. You can't see the future, can you? Or maybe at a circus? I've been known to travel and perform from time to time. The noblest art is that of making others happy." The pair rounded a corner onto Haymaker Street, following the movement of the large crowd. Virginia stretched her arms toward the sky and continued talking. "I'm sure it's fine, though. Destiny will eventually converge and right itself, like the tide moving in and out, or a rocket ship landing on the moon." "A rocket on the moon?" "Well, no, not yet, but it's an inevitable. Before the decade is out, fanfare and script reading and all that." Stokely briefly wondered if Virginia was on drugs. She looked at him and smiled. "All right, Ducky, I'm going that way." She pointed down a side street, "until our paths cross again." She grabbed his hand again and shook it once. Stokely watched her wander away. We're going to pause there.
I hit the wrong camera button. I think I might have blinked out there for a second. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you so much for doing that reading. I feel like I have been left hanging. Actually, I'm like, no, wait, we're in the middle of a thing. I'm listening to this. Okay.
So you can read more if you want.
Right? I can, in fact. I can get that book and read some more. So we do have some questions from the audience this afternoon. And let me get over to these and pull them up so that we can look at, and then I have also one question of my own as well, if I have time to throw it in there. So the first question I think I saw was this one, which is, what comes first, the plot or the characters?
For this story, the characters came first. Um, Actually, it's very silly. We were doing Halloween costumes when I lived at a backpackers hostel, and we decided to be time travelers. So we came up with these like looks.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, that would actually be like, that's an interesting, it's actually a trio. We have not yet met the third character in this reading, obviously. Um, so that's how that happened. The book that I'm currently writing, plot came first. So it really depends on like how you want the story to go. And there's different ways of writing too, either plot driven or character driven. It's really up to the writer. But this one definitely was characters first.
Is the book you're currently writing a sequel to this one?
No, but there will be a sequel to this book. It's just I took a break. So I'm
Yes.
working on a science fantasy one, but I will definitely be coming back to finish. I have part of the sequel to this one already written, but I'm just
How many are to be in this series?
I'm planning for it to be 2 or 3. We'll see how long the second one ends up being.
Cool. So, so the next question that we have, okay, let me find it, is what is the most difficult part about writing for Shelli?
It's kind of silly, but spelling is really hard for me. I have like dyslexia. I had an IEP when I was in school. If you go to a school system that had those, sometimes I spell so badly that the writing programs can't figure out what I'm trying to say. And like
Oh,
sometimes Google thinks I'm trying to speak another language and it'll give me other languages. And like if I type into the search bar, but luckily, I have a very understanding and very good speller of a girlfriend, so I just text her a description of the word, and then she's like, "Here's
the
how that
word.
works." So that one's really hard, and sometimes balancing work, like time management, but at the moment, that's not really so much a problem.
Well, so can I ask a little bit more? This is interesting with the spelling issue that because you have difficult doing that. So, how I guess that being the thing, like how has that really affected you wanting to go into this? Because I mean, I assume that you didn't just decide you wanted to write a book a year ago or something, right? Like you've probably wanted to be a writer for some time. And how did that affect, if it's not too personal, to ask the struggle of writing and learning to be a good writer such that you have a complete work that will be published, and the whole journey of being somebody, just say in grade school or junior high, who writes funky little things into an actual published author. That must have been a frustrating thing that you had to grapple with.
It is kind of, I don't know, weird. I never thought I wanted to be an author like when I was in high school. I was like, oh, I want to do something like artsy, which I
Hmm.
have now done. Like I'm a performer as well. And I most of the like creation with words that I did in high school was through theater because we had a theater teacher who allowed us to like cultivate and write our own shows a lot. He was, super chill with that. Um, so it wasn't ever really as much of a problem with that stuff, especially because we'd usually do it like in pairs or in a group. So usually someone else would write it down. This
Gotcha.
was more like I wrote a short story just for myself for fun. And then some of my roommates were like, okay, read it to us. And then I read that. It was actually the second chapter, the chapter where we meet Stokely. And then they were like, okay, so what's the rest of the story? So I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Sounds like a fun thing for me to do when I don't have anything to do. And part of why I did that was because I'd learned from this other super good professional circus performer that circus people and other like athletic people should really cultivate hobbies because a
Hmm.
lot of people, when they transition out of a physically minded career, They oftentimes feel very lost. She bakes. She makes these beautiful pies, like these like Instagram worthy pies. And that was like advice that she had, and I was like, that's a good idea. So I wrote the book, and then a friend of mine that's a librarian was like, oh, let me edit it, and now you need to send it off. And I was like, no one would want to publish this book. And then I did, and then after I think 4 rejections, the 5th time, a publishing company was like, yeah, we'll make that. So I never really had that kind of problem. I have felt like, oh, I shouldn't be an author because I can't spell, but I have other friends who are like, I think it's The Great Gatsby and The Grapes of Wrath both had the same editor, right?
Okay.
Like, editors are super important. So even if you have trouble spelling and you have dyslexia, like, you have editors, and
Yes.
like, yeah.
People whose job it is to do all of the final polishing and other such things.
Yeah. And beta readers are so important because you will not notice all of the spelling errors that you have after a while, and they will catch them. Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
So we have, let's see, when you're writing an emotionally draining or charged scene, how do you get into the mindset to write that?
I've never found it very particularly hard. I do acting now, and I do immersive acting, which is very like one-on-one. So it's kind of like when you're getting ready to perform a scene. I think I've always been one of the sort of actors that can just like sort of turn it on and turn it off for a lot of things. Like I know some people will like listen to sad music before they have a sad scene. I was
Right.
never really one of those people. Like when I played the Red Queen and I had to get like furiously angry, it was never hard for me to stop doing that. The ones that I have to most get in the headspace for are fight scenes, and I'll usually force my roommates to help me act those out so that they seem realistic. And comedy stuff. Comedy stuff, I really have to like think about it and like sometimes like read the funny bits out loud or like read them to someone else. That's definitely the hardest one for me to like get into the headspace of. I like writing comedy. It's a little bit more challenging for me.
I think so. I have like small little things that I've written, nothing, nothing so much as a whole book like you, but I think that I would probably have quite my difficulty writing comedy. So I, I mean, not to say that, not to say that I like don't like comedy, like I'm not a funny person. I'm too stoic all the time or something, but I just I think it's different when things happen in life versus translating that onto a page.
Yeah, and a lot of my more comedic stuff is more like reality-based comedy, I would say. I don't like cringe humor and I don't really know how to write it. I like very whimsical, like weird, Monty Python, Kung Pao, Enter the Fist sort of strange stuff, but I don't really write that either. A lot of my comedy is very like a child that doesn't know how to pronounce a word properly, so uses the wrong word, but in the context, it also kind of makes sense,
Kind of Seinfeld, right? Like,
situational. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that I like to write.
so oh, that made me have a question about that. And now it like as soon as I took the question off the screen and the whole thing just went right out of my head. So sorry about that. Now I did have kind of I was gonna ask you, okay, okay, now I don't know what order I want to do things in. Haha. Okay. I was gonna ask you a question if I could, because I was listening to you read there. And in your reading, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
In your reading, you said, uh, the noblest art is that of making other people happy. And that is a quote,
It
if
is a
I
quote. You are
recall
good.
correctly. But
Yeah.
I could not remember who made that quote. I was like, I am sure that's a quote. I will have to ask. So
So it's a little nod to that character, Virginia. She actually has 2 quotes in that chapter. A little bit later, she says, um, "Those who are silent in times of injustice wind up in the bottom rung of hell." I'm definitely messing up that quote, but it's
Dante's
along the
lower
line.
circles.
Yeah. So it's basically like if you do nothing in times of injustice, then you're just as bad or worse than the people that did the thing.
Right.
So the noblest art, that is a quote from Barnum or Bailey. Can never remember. It's one of those two.
Oh,
Barnum and Bailey. Yeah.
yes.
I'm a circus person. I know a lot about circus history. And part of why I included that in there was because he is this very famous figure who, you know, had this massive circus, and it eventually became this 3 giant circuses merging together. He was also like a huckster, and he stole from people, and he lied all of the time. So he's like kind of this morally gray area, you know?
Because he was doing this awesome thing, but then also at
Yeah.
not expenses that are not okay.
Yeah. Like there's this whole hilarious story where one of them made a fake stone mummy of a giant. They like
Mhm.
had a sculpture made it, a sculpture artist. And then the other one was so mad about this because it was attracting so much attention that in the middle of the night they went in and made a plaster copy of it and then made their own version and said that they had the original one, and it was like this crazy hilarious feud. So it's kind of a nod to the fact that the time travelers are sometimes a little bit morally gray because they have this weird life experience, and
Right.
you know, they're not always telling the truth. Uh,
Right.
and the other one is obviously a reference to Stokely, who we first meet him at a civil rights march in the 60s. Like he is clearly, you know, trying to make the world better.
Right.
Yeah.
Try
So
getting in
you
there.
have a
Try. What?
you have a good ear.
Oh, well, thank you. I sometimes it is one of the things that I love actually about even being able to do this show and just talk to the authors directly, but also when I read books, because I do some reviews and whatnot here on the channel of various books. But when I read books, I look for things like that. Like uh, I I know that I fall into the category of sacrilegious with the highlighting and underlining in my
Right.
books.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
do. I highlight things that I think are quotes or significant passages that give me thought about something, you know, on say a philosophical, ethical, or moral topic, because I find that interesting to let myself go down that thinky rabbit hole. So I guess that's kind of also how I read the books. And one of my favorite things about this show in particular is that oftentimes the authors, such as yourself, get to get to tell us, the audience, where they have kind of hidden little Easter eggs in their books or made little references that are kind of a shout out to a thing that maybe you otherwise wouldn't pick up, right? Just as reading. So I like to read for that. And I also like to know about this because I like to hear like what are the little things behind a certain scene, right? Like, was it inspired by a real life incident or somebody that you know? Is a character based off someone you know or something? So I think it's pretty cool what you're saying about the Barnum and Bailey and also also working in circus arts yourself. So
I would love to write like a full book about circus life eventually, just because I haven't read, like, there's the Night Circus and there's Water for Elephants. There aren't really that many books written specifically from someone that actually has like lived circus life. I have a couple friends that actually lived on the Ringling train, and I want to get
whoa.
stories from them about that because, you know, the circus people are fun. They're pretty crazy.
Right. So speaking of that, now one of the other things I wanted to. Oh wait, we have another question. Let's see. Let me pull that up here really quick. The question, because I like to take audience questions first. What, in your opinion, are the most important elements of good writing?
I think having a variety of beta readers, especially pertaining to the thing that you're writing. So, for instance, on mine, I made sure to have a couple beta readers that were older than me and also a good amount older than me.
Hmm.
Obviously, for anything farther back than like the 40s, you're not really going to be able to have a lot of people who could read for that. But there was stuff in the 60s that happens in the story that it was great to have someone being able to be like, oh, like this and this and this, like
Like
this
they
is
were there, or
yeah. Or like if you're writing, if you're say from California, I have Californian friends, they don't actually know that much about Southern life. So if they were writing a book based in the South, I would say, oh, get yourself some some beta readers. If you're a man writing with a female main character, get a woman to read your book. The guy that wrote The Martian, he wrote another book based on the moon, and I liked the book, but I was like, you should have gotten a woman to read this, because some of the stuff that your female main character does just isn't, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And likewise, like if you're a woman writing for a man, like you should do the same thing.
Right.
So that's very important.
That's a really good perspective, actually. Like,
yeah. Or like
anyway.
as like a lesbian woman, I've totally read a couple books where they tried to write a lesbian character, and I'm like,
well, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. I know that there's two schools of thought: plotters and pantsers, people who write by the seat of their pants and people who like to plot. I'm more of a pantser, but I do have an overarching plot. And that is super important, especially for the middle of your book. Because if you don't at least know like 8 story beats, like it can be that simple, it will feel meandering. And it's like you just need to like have at least a little bit of structure. Let's see, most important elements. Write what you know, and if you're writing what you don't know, do a bunch of research beforehand. Try not to go like too rabbit holey. I know some people get so obsessed that they like research for like 6 months. I don't think you need to go that insane, but if you're not writing your lived experience, just read about it online. Like Virginia, obviously, eventually she has a prosthetic. I just found Reddit threads of people who were, missing limbs, or read or watched YouTube tutorials on like what it's like to live with a prosthetic.
Interesting.
Just like really basic stuff. And the most important thing, I think, is write a story that you would like to read. And that works for any sort of text-based creative stuff. I wrote 2 lesbian main characters in my first immersive theater show because I was like, oh, I want a science fiction show that the main characters look kind of like me. But other non-gay people came to that show and still had fun. Like it wasn't,
Well, sure, it's not exclusive.
Yeah, it's not exclusive. Just write what you know. So like, if you want to write about mechanics or space aliens, like it's just write what you would enjoy reading yourself. If you don't enjoy reading it, then no one else is going to.
That is a fair statement, I think. And it kind of brings me around a little bit to the other question that I was going to ask before we had the one here from the audience, which was you mentioned something that you had written for theater. So this book is not the only thing that you've written. You've written some other stuff. Can you talk about that a little bit? Some of the other things you've written?
Yeah, so I have a immersive theater group. For people who don't know what immersive theater is, it's like the haunted house of theater. Haunted house, you're in a horror movie, you get to be part of it. Immersive theater, it's the same thing. You're part of the plot. If you've ever heard of Sleep No More, that's the most famous one. That's Macbeth, I think. Yeah, Macbeth, Sleep No More. Or like I was in an Alice in Wonderland one where I was the Red Queen, so the audience literally got on trial and we were like, they got to paint roses. They were the plot, basically. So I've written for that, The Grave Remind Estate, critically acclaimed. Very, very proud of that. Last Halloween, we were pick of the week for the big immersive theater.
Oh, congratulations on that.
Yeah. And that's the one that we're actually going to be trying to turn into a movie because we were supposed to have another run of it in April. And then we fell into the darkest timeline, I guess.
The darkest timeline.
Yeah.
Of all the possible timelines we could be in, we got this one.
We got this one. It's not even like a fun dystopia. There's no aliens or like demon portals or,
no Bigfoot, no Loch Ness Monster.
No Mad Max. Like,
yeah, nothing.
So we have Mystic Ventures Collective. That's like the group that put it on. And we also just started a podcast, which I am writing.
That's okay.
Eggtooth Community College. It's a second-rate magical community college. It's a fiction podcast, obviously. I'm just going to pull this up here a little bit so we can just show people really quick. Well, you can continue to talk, but I'm just going to pull them up. This is your podcast here. Do we have that? Yes. So the most affordable higher education institute for magical studies. Yeah. So you can
The
imagine it's
greater
following
Cliff Edge area.
So that's going to be releasing an episode once a month, maybe twice a month if we can do that. And if you support us on our Patreon, you get it a week ahead of time. You also get a lot of other stuff on the Patreon, like postcards once a month and like special behind the scenes episodes and videos and stuff like that. And we've been doing other things. We did a murder mystery recently, entirely online, which we might
Oh,
actually do
cool.
again. Yeah, that was pretty fun.
So can I ask about this? And I'm pulling up your Patreon now so we can just take a look at this real quick. But can I ask about this murder mystery online? And maybe I'm dating myself by asking this question, but how does something like that work? When if somebody were to want to participate in it, what does that look like?
So far in the immersive industry, there's been kind of two different routes for this whole situation. Some people have gone with the live Zoom route. Like
Okay.
there's a nightclub show that's been happening on Saturdays that got a lot of press for that. I went to that show. I didn't like the lag issues caused by Zoom. That was my main problem with it. I liked the actors and I thought it was fun, but I didn't like the lag that happened there. So
Right.
instead, what we did was we set up sort of social media accounts for all of the different characters, and we would put out content on these different accounts every day during the duration of the show. Some of which were YouTubes, some of which were there was an email you could find. There was a secret website that if you like looked at some of the pictures on the Instagram, you could figure it out. That was like kind of the like slightly harder stuff to find. Um,
Okay.
so it was like you had to look at clues. There was a couple of like hidden messages in like pictures with like dice and cards and things. Um, and then the audience could directly engage with commenting, with emails, with things like that. Um, and it was a set amount of time. So when you bought your ticket, you knew how long the show was going to be. And then you could submit your answers kind of whenever you wanted. Most people submitted answers right at the end of the show. And then we announced, the winner and what had actually happened and all that.
Right. So, what is the best way for people to get involved with something like that if they wanted to get involved? I'm looking for here we go. I know that there's a little follow button that's always on Patreon, and I wanted to just give a follow there. So I was like,
Yeah.
where's the follow button? So, yeah. So, what is the best way for people to get involved if they were wanting to do that? Oops, come back up here.
So you could support us on the Patreon, obviously. We have on Mystic Ventures website or on my own website, I kind of send out the same information on both of them. There's newsletters, and we'll be sending out information. Yeah, I think those would probably be the best ways. Oh, Mystic Ventures also has a YouTube that we do put out like free stuff on as well.
Oh, okay.
We're
I will.
currently putting up Alice in Wonderland chapter by chapter.
Yes, which I saw there on the Patreon, it looked like. So it comes out ahead of time on Patreon and then
Yeah,
up
comes
onto the
out there
YouTube.
and then goes
I'll
on
have
the
to go
YouTube.
give you guys a like and subscribe. And all of you out there at home should also go give them a like and subscribe so you
Yeah.
can get in on the goodness there for the immersive theater. So the last thing that we have, and I guess I should say though before, so the last thing we have, of course, is our ebook. Excuse me, my foot itched. I'm like, sorry, I'm reaching off screen. It's like I had whenever your foot itches, it's always severe. It's never a moderate itch. It's always like, okay, so enough about that. Anyway, uh, so if we are having an ebook giveaway of this book, and so for those of you watching at home, now is the time to put your name into the comments if you would like to be entered to win this. If you would like to be entered to win this book, so please get your names entered right now into the comments. And while I'm giving you guys a second to do that and let any lag happen so that it comes through here on my end, I wanted to also bring up that on our Patreon here at Faye Productions, there will also be bonus content from you. And can you just speak a little bit just for a second or two about how about the content that we will be seeing if you are one of our Fae Productions patrons.
Yeah. So my lovely cover here was actually done by a comic book artist. And I know that she sent the publisher and me some other sketches. So I'm going to send over alternate versions of it. Her name is Gwen. I should know that. I should know her last name. I'm going to find that in just a second because her comic books are excellent. And you should read
What kind
them.
of comic books does she normally do?
Very steampunk stuff.
Cool. That sounds just to give her a little bit of a bump too, since she's your amazing cover artist. Do you know where her work might be found?
Yes, I was just trying to copy her name.
Okay.
Okay,
I've got Holly Gunther and Becky Henderson for names to put into our drawing, just so you guys know. And then you were saying, I'm sorry, Shelli.
Oh, I just sent you her name.
Oh, okay. I will actually. Here we go. Gwen Tavares.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just going to put that in there. So we have our cover artist is Gwen Tavares. I will put that there. And she is also a comic book author, you say? Author and artist?
Yeah, she's the artist.
Okay.
If you've ever been to Clockwork Alchemy or actually quite a number of steampunk cons on the West Coast, she's done art for them. I think she did the Yule Steam Expo in Reno as well last year, possibly the year before that.
I've definitely heard of the Clockwork one. That name is super familiar to me.
Yeah, she has a very good style for steampunk cons, I think.
Okay, this is it. We are down to the wire. This is the last couple seconds. If I see no more names coming through. Okay. So we will enter the names now into the wheel and hit the submit button. And let me now pull this up so that we can all see it spin. The wheel of winning, spin, spin, spin. This is always kind of one of my favorite parts.
Oh, getting fun.
Right? It's a wheel of. Okay, so whoop, where did I put it? There it is. There we go. It is spinning. It goes so fast. And the Music Box Fairy is the winner of your book this afternoon. So that is very exciting. And I'm sure she will actually be excited. The Music Box Fairy is one of our Patreon patrons. So congratulations to you, Music Box. You get this afternoon's ebook. And then, of course, for everybody watching at home, if you are on our Patreon, you will get the extra bonus content, which is the alternative cover of this book. And is there anything you would like to say, Shelli, before we bid one another good afternoon?
Thanks for having me on. It was
Absolutely.
Really great. If you guys like my work, totally check out my book. If you get signed up on my mailing list, I'm going to be looking for beta readers for the book I'm working on right now pretty soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, if you hop on our YouTube, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff for Halloween because we're a bunch of out of work actors and we're bored and we love Halloween.
So I will also, all of your information is in the low bar on Ye Old Book of Faces and the YouTubes, and except for your YouTube channel, which I will go back and add that into the information. So if you're watching from home, you can always go and unminimize that and look into the comments there, and you can find her information so that you can follow on all of the places: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Patreon. The list goes on. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and coming on the show. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was delightful.
Absolutely. Have a good afternoon, and thank you everybody for watching. We will see you here back on Sunday for Handmade Home Shopping. That is from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So good night, everybody.
Bye.